Hello and welcome to Agents of Nonprofit. My name is Alexander Lapa, and I'm here to speak with everyday superheroes helping nonprofits using technology. Joining me today is Jodi Hrbek to talk about Salesforce and Salesforce administrators. Jodi, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Alex. I'm so happy to be here. Really appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, we've crossed paths quite a few times on various LinkedIn posts, so I'm really excited to speak with you finally in person, so to speak.
Absolutely. I think we're very like-minded. It's like I'm thinking about something and then I happen to check out your feed and you just said exactly what I was just talking about or thinking about. So it's a little weird.
It is. Okay, so for those people who have not heard you or are listening to you for the first time, can you give me a brief intro of who you are and what you do?
Sure, absolutely. So I have recently published a book. I'm going to lead with that called Rock Your Role as a Salesforce Admin. And that is really something that came out of what has now been 2 decades, believe it or not, of working in the Salesforce ecosystem. And I always also like to share a little bit with this particular audience that actually started my career way back in the day in nonprofits. I worked in a fundraising capacity for a couple of years and then ultimately fell into sales and that led to Salesforce. But I feel like this is kind of full circle today, which is back where my career started.
Your book actually has become quite popular, at least on LinkedIn, because it's lovely to see all the people who have bought it and then they share their excitement with, looking forward to diving into this book. And it's lovely. You said, how long ago did you produce or publish the book?
So the book came out at the end of August. So we're about 5 months in. And I will tell you, I've been blown away by the reception that it's received in the Salesforce community. It's surprisingly hard to press publish on a book. I was very kind of, I guess, taken aback by how much doubt I had before I, literally hit the publish button. And in retrospect, I probably should have done it a year sooner, particularly just given, how many people I think it's really helped since it's been out. So I'm very appreciative of the reception that it's had from the community.
I'm going to have 1,000 questions to ask you about the book. But before we get there, I'm curious to know, how did you start your Salesforce career?
Yeah, so I got really lucky. And I say lucky because I truly believe that a Salesforce career is one of the best options out there because it is a company that has such a broad footprint that I always say there's 100 ways to Salesforce. So whether you're technical or more functional, whether you want to work with nonprofits or, financial services companies, there's kind of something for everyone. So for me, falling into that early in my career really has given me a ton of optionality. So I mentioned I had been in fundraising for a few years and then made my way from there, kind of got the sales bite, if you will, and realized a couple years into it that I probably didn't necessarily love selling as much as facilitating the sales process and helping set up infrastructure and sales training and helping other people be really good at it. So somewhere around 2002, believe it or not, I was in an organization that kind of had sprung up overnight. Kind of a long story how they came to be, but a couple thousand people that created a brand new company and needed some sales infrastructure, sales training. And I had used this very rudimentary version of Salesforce in my prior job. And so as we were, looking to stand up a business development process, I suggested that this was this tool that would really help ensure that we were all kind of leveraging the same information, that we weren't stepping on each other's toes, calling the same people, that we could hand off, our prospective clients throughout the process and make sure that they felt like they were having a coordinated experience. And lo and behold, that ended up being my first deployment of Salesforce that I supported. We were, I think, 300 users at the time, considered one of the largest clients, which is funny now given, how many organizations, literally have multiple thousands of users. But it was a great opportunity to get to experience the platform and something we can talk a little bit about in more detail because I think it's going to have a lot of value to nonprofits. But we had such great results deploying Salesforce for our CRM and our pipeline tracking that as a new company, we also needed a way to track our recruiting process. And we ended up building out an entire recruiting application. And again, I always say, nowadays that people use the platform in a lot of different ways. And in fact, if you're certified, Salesforce Admin, if you took the certification, you might even, recall that some of the test questions are, around that use case. But at the time, back in what was probably 2004, it was a pretty progressive use of the platform, and ended up leading to different folks in the Salesforce recruiting department. They were still kind of up and coming and young company themselves, getting their own infrastructure in place, asking for demos of this app that we had built, this recruiting app. And ultimately, I ended up getting recruited to go work for Salesforce. So I was there for 4 years and then went and hung out my shingle as a Salesforce consultant for a number of years. And then ultimately realized kind of where my heart is primarily in this space is on the client side. So I've spent the last, 8+ years running Salesforce inside a number of different large enterprise organizations.
That's an awesome story. 20 years. I mean, you must have seen so much. I mean, you have seen so much that's evolved in the platform, not just from classic to lightning interface, but just everything else that's around it. I mean, wow. That's a lot of knowledge to be.
Yeah, one of the stories that I always like to share because it really drives home, how far we've come, is that I was at the very first Dreamforce. So for folks aren't familiar, Dreamforce is of course the big annual conference that Salesforce has, and they just celebrated their 20-year anniversary. So I was in attendance at the very first one. And my objective in attending that conference was I wanted to sit down and meet with a product manager because I needed them to understand how desperately we needed an or statement in our reporting capabilities. So back then,
Wow.
If you wanted to report, believe it or not, on this or that, you literally ran 2 reports. You said, here's this, that. And that's how we did it. So that'll give you a sense of how far we've come.
So after, I guess, because you said 20 years in Salesforce, I imagine maybe 17, 16 years after that, you decided to sit down and write a book. What was your motivation for writing a book?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. So it was a couple of things. One is, in full candor, it was selfishly kind of the book that I wanted to have every time I hired a new team member or coached a new admin to, answer some of the things that, I get asked a lot and some of the information that I wish everybody had, right? So here's my expectations. Here are ways that you can add value in this role. So there's a little bit of that, but, I think deep down it was really kind of twofold. And one is I've literally worked with dozens of admins over the years. And, sometimes people that I directly hired and managed, sometimes in capacity where I was a consultant and I was helping, implement and then, oftentimes hiring and onboarding the person who was going to take care of the system ongoing, or any flavor in between. And what I've seen is, it's very common that folks come in kind of, I'm going to say, really with that, what I call an ownership mindset. And they've, got these hard-earned Salesforce credentials and they want to knock it out of the ballpark and they want to do a stellar job. And sometimes it's not always clear what that looks like beyond the obvious kind of hands-on keyboard work, right? And I think it's particularly true that in many cases, and I would venture a guess that this is probably true for your audience from a nonprofit standpoint, where there's not big Salesforce teams. Sometimes there's a solo admin. And so what that means is you've got somebody in the role of care and feeding for Salesforce who's reporting into somebody who is not a Salesforce practitioner themselves. So they don't always have somebody who can model what is the difference between good to great. What does a great Salesforce admin do? What kinds of things can you do to really find value and increase the value that the platform can deliver for an organization? So part of it was wanting to write a book for that person to give them ideas of how to do it. What's the job actually look like? What does it entail? Again, besides the hands-on keyboard work. So that was part of it. And then the second half, the second reason, and this I feel really strongly about, is the first half of the book is called Creating Value. The second half of the book is really about, I call it Calm the Chaos. But I feel very strongly that if I'm going to help people go above and beyond and over deliver, to arm them with the tools to do it in a way that they have a sustainable career, a sustainable role, that they have business boundaries, that they're not over delivering at their own detriment. Both, it's a win-win for, the company and for the individual if we can figure out that right balance and can continue to serve the constituents inside their organization. So the second half of the book is really about that.
And then you talk about Salesforce administrators. Can you give a brief definition? Because there are various roles within Salesforce. The main ones tend to be the Salesforce admin, the Salesforce consultant, Salesforce architect. Sometimes you might have a business analyst, a marketing person. So I know the lines are a bit gray, but if you could somehow make them a bit less gray for the Salesforce admin, what is a Salesforce admin versus any other role within Salesforce?
Sure. And, the answer is always going to be it depends, right? Because to a certain extent, everything that you just mentioned might be a hat that the Salesforce admin apparently sometimes puts on. But the way that I defined it specifically for the book, it has nothing to do with the title. I call out in the book that the audience, it may in fact be somebody whose, title is fundraising coordinator, or development director, or, sales ops, if it's somebody that's working inside a sales organization. So there's any different flavor of how that title actually appears. But really, it's, if you are somebody who is responsible for the care and feeding of Salesforce and the data that's inside it. I think in different organizations, sometimes people will have inherited a Salesforce org that's already built up and ready to go. Sometimes somebody will come in and, be involved with building it from the ground up. I think in either case, somebody who's really creating value is looking for ways on a regular basis where they can continue to iterate it to make sure that it's meeting, what is always changing inside any company, right? The different needs of the organization. So, that to me is kind of the fundamental definition as somebody who's responsible for the ongoing care and feeding. But you use some other terms that I think are, generally part and parcel to the role. So I believe that every Salesforce admin also wears a business analyst hat, right? There may or may not also be somebody with that title on a project or, inside, as a colleague within an organization. But either way, that hat that they have to put on to make sure that they really understand the needs. What are we trying to solve for? Making sure they understand the outcome and the why behind the ask before ever putting hands on keyboards. So I think that's part of the role. Product management is something else that I talk about in the book. Take a page from product management. So really making sure that before we build something that we understand the value that it's going to bring, that we can measure the outcome, that we, do something with fast time to delivery in mind. The definition of Salesforce architect, again, depending on who you ask, certainly there's a technical architect, but I think the concept of a solution architect, somebody who can sit down and model a process or, leverage the relational database that is Salesforce to, get processes out of, sometimes spreadsheets and into the system where you can really get more bang for your buck out of the platform. So all of those in my mind are facets of things that are, generally part of the admin role.
That's a great definition. I totally agree with it. And if there was like a nonprofit who is considering Salesforce or may already have Salesforce, but they don't have the technical expertise to manage it. Actually, I love that care and feeding Salesforce. Is this a good entry level book, or is there some kind of expectation that the person needs to have before they're able to benefit from it?
Yeah, it's a great question. So what I would caution anybody picking up the book is my book is not going to tell you how to do Salesforce. It's not going to tell you how to set up roles and profiles and how to, literally create the org and add the fields and do the hands on keyboards work. So I call that out early on. And it's not because I don't think any of that is not critical to the role. It's just that there are a lot of resources out there, be it the Trailhead site, which is the training that Salesforce offers for free, or various and assorted other books that will literally teach you what I call the click streams, the how to. My book will tell you, okay, so I have that knowledge. How do I apply that? And what else do I need to be thinking about to make sure that I'm really leveraging this platform for the organization that I'm supporting to help them get what they need out of it?
That makes total sense. So then how would you define your intended audience?
So it's funny. When I wrote the book, I had kind of an ideal avatar in mind, and quite frankly, I could imagine that person, very well may be the Salesforce admin inside a nonprofit. And what I mean by that is the ideal avatar that I was really directing this book for. When if you read any of the books about how to write a book, everybody says, picture your target audience, exactly who is that person. And, I always envisioned it was somebody that had a couple of years experience. And they, kind of what I mentioned before, worked somewhere where they, were passionate about making, Salesforce sing within inside their organization, but maybe knew that there were just a few things that they could tweak in order to really make a bigger impact and to really elevate the role. That it might be somebody that kind of felt like I'm not quite getting the seat at the table, or people are coming to me after the fact, kind of saying they need something in particular instead of wanting to talk about a business challenge and letting me be there to really help figure out what the solution looks like. So that was who I intended it for. What's been interesting and frankly really rewarding is how many people at the other ends of the spectrum have given feedback that it's been really helpful. So specifically, I certainly didn't exclude, newcomers when I wrote this, and it says, as long as you understand some of the common principles, I think you'll get value out of it. But I've really heard from a lot of people who are breaking into the ecosystem who have told me, first of all, that it's been so helpful in allowing them to understand what the day in the life of an admin actually looked like. So they've said, I've done the trailheads and I've got my cert even, but I just couldn't imagine, like, what does that mean I'm doing all day? What kind of conversations am I having? Like, how am I going to actually apply this? So I think that's been, great to hear that they're getting value. And as well, I've had a lot of people that are new to the role also sharing that it's been extremely helpful for them during the interview process, that they're not necessarily relating to the hands-on keyboard work, but how would you handle, what would you say, what considerations would you have if, and that they're helpful from that perspective and providing a little bit of color. And then as well, Alex, it's been great that I've had a lot of people that have reached out and said, I've been doing this for 10 years and you just gave me some ideas how I, perhaps could be thinking about managing stakeholder relationships a little bit different, or some very specific processes or techniques that I've never tried before that might be useful for, streamlining how we get work done on projects. So needless to say, I think if you're in the realm of Salesforce, I think there's probably something in there for everybody.
I get the impression that a lot of people are, at least starting off, they get thrown into the Salesforce role and, surrounded and bombarded by information, learning how to, set up users, set up the profiles. There's all this vast amount of information that they're consuming, but they're missing the why, or they're missing the higher level understanding and the vision and the goals. And it sounds like your book actually provides that. It's once you've gotten past that initial chaos, as you mentioned, here's a landscape, here's the forest from the trees that give you a bit of guidance, whether you're, still relatively new or just need a better, another person's perspective on the landscape. Would you agree?
I would. And I, when we were talking about different facets of the role, you said consultant, and I didn't tie back to that one, but I would also say, part of this book is helping people be consultative. And I believe that, again, regardless of what your actual title is as a Salesforce admin, right? You wear the hat of an internal consultant. And that's not intuitive to people. And it's also not intuitive, I have since learned, to people that, it's okay. And in fact, a thing they should do to ask questions and bring ideas to bear. So, a story that I've told recently is, somebody read this book, and one of my early chapters is called Probe to find out what they really need, right? So a lot of times I know you know this because I've seen you talk about it in posts, right? We get, we'll call it the infamous checkbox request, right? I need a checkbox. And you've been doing this long enough, we know that like you probably don't actually need a checkbox. And I always say, if I had $1 for every time I actually built a checkbox, like maybe I could buy somebody a cup of coffee. But if I had $1 for every time I didn't build a checkbox because we found out it wasn't really what they needed, I could probably take a bunch of friends to a fancy dinner, right? So, but what somebody told me was they said, I read that and I not only didn't know that I could question that stakeholder, I had no idea that I should. That's the value that I bring to the table. So I think part of what I'm loving from the feedback that I'm getting is people are understanding like you're empowered to do that, and that the value as a Salesforce admin, it's not that we can add a field. That's actually the commoditized piece of the role. The value done right is that we can ask the questions to figure out, do we need a field? Why do we need a field? What are we going to do with the field? How are we going to report on the field? Is the field actually what we need? Is there a different way to solve this? What is it that we're even trying to do? And let's look at the big picture and making sure that we're setting up a solution that is going to meet the need, not just react to whatever's coming our way. So a lot of the book is literally word tracks, which is why I gave you a hard time and said, you spoke to me in your post today, Alex, because you gave a literal talk track of, how to handle a request from a stakeholder. And that's a lot of what the book is about.
It's such a pleasure to hear the pushback, that the realization, oh my goodness, I don't have to be an order taker. I actually have a valuable input and an ability to question the why, that what is the purpose, and the should I is the biggest one, as you mentioned. Yes, chances are you can do it in Salesforce. You can add that checkbox, but should you? Is that the right thing to do? And then why, to make sure you understand the vision of it, because there might be another idea. The example that I once heard from a coach of mine is that imagine you as a person walks into your doctor and you tell the doctor, listen, I did some research and I have, I need a heart surgery. I have all the symptoms. Please perform the surgery. And of course, the doctor is going to laugh and say, okay, that's great. I'm happy you did your diagnosis. Now let me do mine. And then,
right.
They're not just an order taker. They have to go through a
Right.
certain process to be able to justify and determine if that's the right choice. They won't just take you at face value. And unfortunately, I don't know if it's unfortunate if there's too many, but I get the sense that there are more admins that there should be who are more just order takers. Just tell me what to do, hands on keyboard, I'll do it, versus why are we doing this? Is this the right choice? And asking those kinds of questions, because that's where the real value of a Salesforce administrator is not just doing what they're told, but actually directing the conversation to whether it should be done or not. And if not, what is a better way to do it?
100%. And I mean, that's kind of my mission, right? Is to empower the admins to say, like, not only can you do that, like, that's your job. Like, I actually want to, make a thing on LinkedIn, which from now on says, if we're going to post a Salesforce admin job, one of the requirements is, and the daily responsibilities is asking great questions. Like, that is actually a thing that we expect you to do. That's how far we're going to go to empower admins to say, like, we want you to do that. We need you to do. At the end of the day, our stakeholders are not experts in Salesforce. We are. Our stakeholders are experts in their business process. They know the outcome they need, but they don't know if they need a checkbox versus a yes, no, versus something that's not a field at all. It's actually something altogether different. So, that's really, my mission is to help admins understand that they can, step into that role, and then as well to give them the tools to do it. So, Alex, you just said, ask why. Some people literally think, like, they read that and they think, I just keep saying why. Well, guess what? That's not a really effective way to get what you need. You're going to end up having somebody said, because I said so, right? So part of the book is scenarios and talk tracks and different ways to say it so that, somebody understands why you're asking, where you're heading, and feels like they're being listened to in the course of those questions.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I was shortcutting that, but it reminds me of a 5-year-old asking the why questions. And at a certain point, you might get so frustrated answering the question that he gets the conversation devolves to a point where you say, because some things are and some things are not. It's
right, exactly, right. And so our
Yeah.
stakeholders get like that too. It's the because I said so.
Exactly. So aside from the ability or the understanding or the realization that they should push back, what are some other characteristics that you think a Salesforce admin should have?
Yeah, absolutely. So, certainly, that I use a framework, which is, it's called the Salesforce Admin Pro competencies, and it's kind of how the chapters are laid out. And, the first one is probing, right? So we just talked a little bit about that. The second one is providing expert advice, and that probably falls, into a very similar vein of, step into your power, and, understanding that that's part of what our job is to, not only ask the questions, but also bring forward the solutions and the recommendations and have the perspective and point of view on how the platform can be fully leveraged or better leveraged inside an organization. So I think, that again is something that doesn't come easy to people. So I actually give some tips and guidance around kind of that concept of what does having a point of view look like for an admin, and, just simple things of, when we're researching options, we all know there's multiple ways usually to do something in Salesforce that, if we're going to bring them to the table, we're also going to lead with, we could do this or this. My recommendation is to do this, and here's the reason why. I would suggest we move in this direction, and here's the reason why, as opposed to hey, there's two options. That's the difference between, somebody who is just being an okay admin versus hey, wait a minute, I'm really starting to share the value that my expertise has when I bring it forward with that kind of recommendation. And, along the lines as well, I talk about the data that's in the system. There's so much data and insight sitting in most people's Salesforce if it's set up right. And yet, I'm willing to venture a guess that, a lot of people inside the organization have no idea what nuggets are in there. And whether that's, kind of more insight around the donor base, or, what we can learn about our volunteers and how we might structure something different, whatever those things are, that, having the foresight to not only surface the data, right? So a couple things. One is we want to make sure we're not just reporting on the things people are asking for. We're also saying, hey, there's a whole bunch in here that nobody's looking at. Let me show you some of the things that I can report on, or reports that we can create that you can leverage. And then closing that loop as well with, and let me show you some solutions on the platform, maybe something out of the box, maybe something we can do with it that we're not currently doing, where we can, achieve whatever objective it is that the data is showing. So that's part of it. And then a couple other things that I think are really important. One is being proactive. And that part of, everything we're talking about right now assumes some level of proactivity, but that's really kind of, exhibited in folks that are, again, not waiting to be asked, right? That they're not, I tell a story in the book. It's a true story of somebody who was an admin inside an organization for 10 years and had never built a dashboard. Which I say that folks that aren't familiar with Salesforce dashboards, but it's oftentimes kind of an entry point for somebody that maybe doesn't have all of the administrative know-how yet, but really has a good understanding of the data and the data model, and can really leverage the Salesforce reporting tools to build some very knocked out dashboards. It's a fairly I'm going to say easy for Salesforce admins to do that. It's one of the benefits of the platform. But this person had been doing it for 10 years and had never built one. And I said, how in the world is this possible? This is one of the first things you do. And by the way, it's where you get the most accolades. People usually are all over that. And she said, well, no one ever asked me to. And so I always use that as my proof point of, we don't want to be that admin, because again, our constituents, our stakeholders often don't even know what to ask for, right? If somebody didn't know you could build dashboards that easily, how would they know to ask for it? If somebody didn't know that there's, out of the box features and functionality that's of crazy things, how would they know to ask for it? They don't know the art of the possible. So part of being proactive is, bringing forward those solutions, as well as being aware in advance of what could go wrong. That's another level of proactivity that I talk about is, taking the time before we roll something out to think about, have I done what I call a pre-mortem and thought about all the what ifs and made sure that I've got, monitoring my own reports and dashboards in place to see if something does go wrong, that I'd be the first to know about it or I know how to fix it. So, certainly that is part of the pro competencies, if you will.
All great points. I'm curious, because your book is not necessarily the very first thing a newbie, a new Salesforce admin, or someone who wants to be a Salesforce admin would pick up, that they would need at least a bit of basic knowledge of the Salesforce system. What would you recommend as a starting point, let's say for a nonprofit who is considering getting Salesforce, or again, who has Salesforce but doesn't know what to do with it? Like, where would be the first entry points? And for, what would be at least the minimum amount of time before it would be useful to pick up your book?
So you could always pick it up and take a read just to know what you're getting into. But, generally I'm going to direct people that are considering the role to Trailhead, which is the free training that Salesforce offers. And there's some specific modules around, the nonprofit space and setting an org up there. I think there's some really good organizations, some paid, some free, that are out there as it pertains to helping people break into the ecosystem. And, a lot of people ask me, like, should I pay for training? You don't have to. There's a lot of great organizations out there. Some people find that it's beneficial to shorten the learning curve. I usually say it's not necessarily that you're paying for the training. It's usually for the context and the community. So the context meaning somebody that can just help you translate some of the concepts faster into, what's relevant in your world, and a community of people that can kind of cheerlead you on and go through it with you. And so I know there's some that are fairly broad programs, like Talent Stacker program. That's one that I've been very impressed with. I think Technopath is an organization that does training specific for people that want to get into the nonprofit space. So that would be something else to look at. But there's going to be something for everybody. That what I would really caution is, do your homework. Salesforce obviously provides some discounted licenses under certain circumstances for nonprofits, but it is still a critical system inside the organization. So whether it's somebody that's learning to be an admin themselves, or whether it's a company that's thinking about doing Salesforce, you want to be thoughtful and make sure that you've got either the education and or a team with the right experience to help get it set up. Because at the end of the day, it can be a very powerful tool inside company, inside an organization, inside a nonprofit. But just like anything else, it's gonna be as good as it's set up for a particular organization's processes.
Yeah, the power of Salesforce is that it can do anything, and the disadvantage is it can do almost anything.
Right, exactly.
Continuing the career path then of an admin, I got the impression, based on what I'm hearing, that you feel that admin usually is the entry point into Salesforce. So what would be some potential career paths to go after an admin? I know we talked about a few different roles. Do you think, like, in each of those roles, it would be good to be first an admin and then to move up or sideways, or however you want to paint the picture, toward the business analyst or the consultant or the architect? Or, like, where would you see potential future promotion paths for an admin?
Sure. Honestly, I think the world is your oyster. If you go and kind of nail the core competencies required to be a Salesforce admin. I think, again, it's as much of a baseline of knowledge as opposed to a role itself. So it could very well be, inside a lot of, companies, whether it be, I've seen in a lot of universities these days that are leveraging Salesforce, that the people that are wearing that hat of the admin also are in a business function, doing something with enrollment or something in admissions. It, very well is likely the same inside some nonprofits, right? So it may be that you don't necessarily want to have a quote unquote tech career, but you want to be the business owner, if you will, around the database, however it's used inside your particular organization. So there's certainly a functional career path that you can leverage from having this background. I think in smaller organizations you can wear both hats. That becomes very challenging inside bigger organizations, specifically as more and more companies are starting to leverage Salesforce as a enterprise platform as opposed to quote unquote just a CRM. So I make that caveat, but I think then you can also really look at a variety of different, I call it flavors of Salesforce, right? I think increasingly inside those kinds of companies that are, really starting to leverage, the full horsepower of Salesforce, if you will, they're starting to realize that it is not necessarily feasible that somebody could wear two hats, right? The functional hat of being kind of the business owner and knowing all the things behind the scenes that are necessary for the care and feeding. So we're starting to see the emergence of more and more roles that are not hands-on keyboard, the business analyst role, the product manager role, but yet still require that understanding of what I call the art of the possible on the platform and how does it work and what's easy breezy versus what's hard, so that they can help make some of those business decisions and trade-offs and prioritization. So that's certainly an option. And then, certainly somebody might choose to go down a bit of a more technical route, right? So people come in my experience, and sometimes start working with some of the declarative tools, the declarative automation, and really decide that, they kind of like this almost kind of programming aspect of it, if you will, and can go deep on that should they choose. And then there's also really kind of the training component and working with users and change management. So, it's very possible that somebody might have a Salesforce quote unquote career, and they're not actually doing any hands-on keyboards work at all, but they're really focused on ensuring that the people that are using it are having a great experience. So that's why I like it, and that's why I'm so bullish. Is I really believe there's something for everybody somewhere under that Salesforce rubric.
There are some people that approach me before they've walked into the Salesforce environment and asking me, is it a wise idea to invest yourself and to place your career in the hands of Salesforce? I mean, Salesforce is only one company. Obviously, it's majorly huge these days. I don't even know how to quantify that. But the idea is there's a concern that before Salesforce there were other CRMs, right? I used to come from the Siebel CRM world before transitioning to Salesforce. And there are obviously some skills and skill sets that can be transferred from that Siebel world into the Salesforce world, but there's a lot of technical parts that can't be. So is there I'm curious to know your perspective on not cautioning or warning or assuring people that Salesforce is a career that you could probably have for a very long time, even to come. Even as popular it is today, there's still a long runway ahead of us to be able to get into the space now and keep yourself going for a long time to come.
Yeah, it's a great question. And by the way, people cautioned me about that 20 years ago, right? So, and here we are 20 years later, and I'm still Salesforce for a living. So I think I would answer that a couple different ways. One is, I'm with you. Salesforce isn't going anywhere anytime soon. It's huge. It's growing. Its footprint is big and vast, and it's sticky. And what I mean by that is because more and more organizations are using it for things that are much broader than where it started, which was just a traditional CRM. It really has an enterprise place within a lot of companies' technology stacks. That's not an easy thing that somebody, just, gets a new flavor of the day and decides they're going to go somewhere else. The switching costs alone, make that very unlikely. But also because I think companies continue to get value of it. So, from my perspective, the demand is still there. It's still needed inside organizations. So many different kinds of companies use Salesforce. So, we've certainly touched on, nonprofit and higher ed, and, health cloud is growing. And I think, I saw something, I think yesterday, that said, the biggest industries were professional services and manufacturing, actually. And then, in there somewhere was, 8% of the companies were retail. I mean, don't quote me on this. I couldn't even tell you where all those numbers came from. But the point is, it's such a broad group of industries that are using the tool and using it different ways that, let's just say, these days the tech industry may be struggling, but, that's not impactful for, when you look at how broad the footprint is of their customers. And, Salesforce is continuing to invest in programs to, essentially fill what they're, publicly acknowledging as a skill gap. They have a, great program if folks want to check it out. It's the Salesforce Talent Alliance. That offers free training for groups that have been historically underrepresented in technology. Recruiting firms are offering free training. I think K2 has a university that's one of the big recruiters that they're trying to grow their own talent because they've got gaps in what they can deliver. So when you look at just all of those different proof points, I would tell you I don't think it's going anywhere anytime soon. That said, I think you hit on, Alex, another, important point is, yeah, you're learning some hands-on keyboard, where to click stream that are, relevant only to Salesforce. You would have to do something different if in fact you were working on a different system. But fundamentally, the skills that you're learning, the work that you're doing, very often in the role is incredibly transferable, right? We're doing discovery, we're being consultative to figure out how to match solutions to a business problem. We're, doing an element of, generally some kind of data work, whether it be, getting data ready to import or scrubbing data or, marketing with our data or, whatever those things are. Like all of those skills that you are doing on a daily basis in the admin role are going to serve you well. You're not going to be an exceptional admin. And let's just say even like it will never happen, but let's just do the magic wand for a minute. Salesforce goes away tomorrow. You're sitting on an entire bag full of extremely valuable skills that you could move into a variety of different directions. So I'm bullish. I have always been bullish on this career for 20 years. It has served me well. I have tried to talk every friend, family member, and Uber driver that I've met into why I think they should do it. So I'm bullish. I remain bullish, and I think it would serve a lot of other people well.
I've convinced my brother and two colleagues within the past 3 months to look into Salesforce. My brother has joined me, but the other two colleagues are starting their journey. And just to add a metric, there was a study that Salesforce published. The study was done by another organization that said, this was a study back in September 2021, that they're expecting 9 million new jobs in Salesforce by 2026.
Yeah.
So
I mean, that's why they're investing. I mean,
Yeah.
they see this talent gap. But by the way, I love that you recruited your brother. I'm seeing this trend of Salesforce and families, I call it, that literally, I'm seeing more and more couples that Salesforce together, parents that are bringing their kids in early on, nieces, nephews. I'm starting to see more and more of this online. And I think it speaks to the power of, a Salesforce career, that there's so much flexibility, so many different ways that you can do it that, and by the way, it's not so shabby from a paycheck perspective either, right? So I think there's a lot to be said of why we're all talking our loved ones into it.
So speaking about the future, I'm curious to know what's in yours. What would you like to see where would you like to see yourself in the next couple of years?
Well, there may or may not be another book on the horizon, hopefully in relatively short order. It'll certainly be faster than it took me to write the last one, at least I can tell you, because that took a couple of years to get over the finish line. I think I've now gotten over my fear of publishing and learned along the way some tips and tricks to make it a little bit faster. So I've actually got two that are both half started. So we'll see which one gets over the finish line first. And I'm also, you've heard it here first, folks. I'm excited to announce that I'm going to be going out on the road later this year doing some interactive trainings related to the book. So Rock Your Role, the interactive workshop coming soon to a city near you.
Awesome. So listen, this has been great. Where can people find your book and to get in touch with you?
Yeah, thank you so much for asking. So you can find the book on Amazon. It's Rock Your Role, ROLE. Since you might be listening and think we're talking about ROLL. So available on Amazon in ebook and paperback, and hopefully I will finish recording the Audible shortly. Been working on that one for a while. And then you can find me online. I'm very present on LinkedIn, so connect with me. I love to interact. It's the only social that I'm doing right now. And then also SF Admin Book is my website. SF, like Salesforce, SF Admin Book. You can go get on the mailing list and be the first to hear when I actually get my city tour dates nailed. And as well, speaking of questions that you can ask so that you're not just hammering away with the why. I actually do have a cheat sheet that you can download with some questions that can facilitate the discovery in a way that maybe goes down a little easier with your stakeholder.
We'll put all those links in the show notes. So thank you so much, Jodi. This has been great. It's been a pleasure.
I appreciate it so much, Alex. Thank you for having me.
All right, that's it for today. I'm Alexander Lapa, and I hope you join me again in the next Agents of Nonprofit.